and welcome to Middlesex Update. I'm your host, Melissa Hurley, and it's a pleasure to be with you again this evening. Tonight we have with us a special guest. You may recognize him for all of you local access fans. Jim Campano is here, and he actually produces and hosts a show right here in Somerville, Somerville Access Cable Television. Jim, thank you for being on Middlesex Update.
Always a pleasure.
This is a little role reversal for you. You're used
That's
to
right.
asking the question, so now you're in the hot seat for a half an hour, and we'll talk to you about what you've been doing just to bring awareness to the West Enders for many, many years.
Right.
As I mentioned, you are the producer and the host of the West End Video Newsletter. And how many years have you been doing that?
15 years approximately now. Let me take an accurate count. I think I started here around 87. Well, I was doing the newsletter for about 2 years before I started the video newsletter.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, it's probably been about 13 years then.
That's great, and you've shown on a few communities, right?
Boston, Medford, Somerville, Brookline, Malden. And we used to be shown in Stoneham, but Stoneham put some rules and regulations in and our sponsors that were in Stoneham went to the place, and they really sort of like were getting a hard time, they said. And we really haven't been on there for about 4 or 5, 6 months, I guess. But we used to be on in Stoneham, too. So.
Great, and the West End Video Newsletter really evolved from a newsletter that you've been doing for probably about 15 years then. And tell me how that came to fruition. How did you start that?
Well, I'll tell you exactly how that happened. Was Chronicle wanted to do a show on development, and I was to be one of the segments. I had never been on camera before, and I didn't know anything about it. So we went down to the West End, and they started walking, and they had this L-shaped boom that went like that. And they put it in front of you like this, and you know, you're supposed to be talking, but you're supposed to be looking forward. And my eyes kept going down to the boom. And then all of a sudden a rainstorm came and like sort of wiped it all out. They said, well, okay, we'll come back tomorrow, we'll call you up and we'll do it again tomorrow. But we had to restart, you know, before the rain came, we restarted like 5 or 6 times because I kept looking down at the monthly.
Right.
You know? So they called me up the next day and they said, well, we don't have time today, something else came up, we're going to have to cancel that segment. Okay, so I blew a segment on Chronicle, and so I said to myself, I was watching cable access, and that was, I guess, around 86 or 87, and they had the commercials going, you too can do. I said, you know, let me go down there, even if, you know, just to learn to get comfortable with the cameras and be able to, you know, sit there. And another thing people don't realize, when you first start doing this, your mind can go blank. There's a tendency for you just to, you've been talking about something you knew all your life, and all of a sudden you just don't have it in your brain anymore. It just like wipes out. So it takes you a while to get to learn, we'll say, camera presence and different things. And basically that's what the host is there for. The host is there for when the guy like me gets all of a sudden goes blank, she asks another question, or he asks another question, and you keep going.
I've seen your show many times. You do a great job. And you've actually had some memorable guests on there also. Tell me a few of your favorite guests.
Ray Flynn. I've always liked Ray Flynn. We had Tom O'Connor, the historian from BC. I'm trying to think now from the start. Some of the better ones. We've had professors. We've had most of the local politicians that were Travellini, Tom Birmingham. Tom Birmingham's mother-in-law came from the West End.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We had him on the show, and he said, I came here. He says, I didn't want to tell you until I got here, but my mother-in-law is from the West End. Her name is Botman, Gertrude Botman, and she lives in Cambridge. I mean, in Chelsea, and so he was good.
Well, it seems like you've had an interesting variety of guests on your show, and it really captures the West End because, as we can talk about later on, I mean, just the wealth of different cultures and people that came from there. But the newsletter that you've been doing for many years, who exactly does that go out to, and
how
often does it go out?
It goes out quarterly, 4 times a year. It goes out to former West Enders or anybody else that we charge $10 a year now just to cover the costs. Anybody that wants to receive it. And matter of fact, when they did an article in the Wall Street Journal, and some guy from Texas called me up and he says, "You, sir, are a great man." I said, well, "Wait a minute." I said, "Great man, or Abraham Lincoln, George Washington." I said, "You know, I may have a modicum of fame now." I said, "But I'm not a great man. And he said, well, I want to subscribe to your newsletter. And he sent me in $10, and I sent it to, his name is, I forgot his name actually, but he lives in Texas, and now he receives my newsletter. We go out to probably about 35 states, and I think we're in about, we have a West Ender in Switzerland, and we have a West Ender in Australia. We used to have one in Iceland, too, but he has since come back to the country.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Matter of fact, we also go out to Jane Jacobs, who's I don't know if you know Jane Jacobs. She wrote a book called The Death and Life of Great American Cities, considered one of the greatest sociologists, and Herb Gans, same thing, considered one of the greatest sociologists. He wrote the book on the West End, the Urban Villages, and that was the first time that was ever used. When people say urban villages now, they don't realize that was a term first coined for West Enders, and then it has since been taken over. Like people on Beacon Hill, they call themselves an urban village, and other places. But the first time it was ever used and coined was basically for West Enders. And
the Wall Street Journal article that you touched on was really, I mean, for those of you who didn't see it, it was a great article. It started on page 1, and then it went on to the next page. And also, we found out that Jim wasn't always called Jim. He's known in the West End as Jimbo.
That's right.
So any of you West Enders out there who think he looks familiar, you might remember him as Jimbo. And it really talked about just the history of the West End, but also what's going on in that area of Boston now. And tell me a little bit about what's going on there right now. There are people that are watching, the younger generation, that won't know what area you're talking about until you tell me present day what it is.
Well, first I'd like to say that whenever somebody comes up to me, like I sell papers in Davis Square, and they come up and they go, Jimbo, I know they read the article. and I wish he never put in that article, they were talking about a Molotov cocktail, and the noise it made when it went off.
Makes, yeah.
And everybody in the world is now asking me, what does it sound like? Go woof, go woof. I'm getting tired of doing woof.
Well, that's what happens when you become a celebrity, Jim.
But anyways, what happened? And one woman said that she read the article. She said, "Are you the guy that wrote about it?" I said, "Yeah." You're talking about the Wall Street article? I said, "Yeah." She says, "I read about you from Lebanon to Paris." So it was sort of strange. But first of all, to realize where the West End is, like she says, like Melissa says, some of this. A lot of people don't know where it is. It's where Charles River Park is today, with Longfellow Place, Emerson, all those places. It was bordered by Beacon Hill, the north slope of Beacon Hill, the river, North Station, and the North End on one side, Government Center on the other, and the railroad yard. So what today is the garden, the new garden, is where the railroads used to be. Railroad yards used to be, and that's where it was. It was where the Charles River came around through North Station, through the North End, up through Scully Square, or what's now Government Center, and that was the West End. What happened was they came in with bulldozers and cranes. In 1948, the government released something like, I forgot how many millions of dollars all over the country, but there was $11 million for slum removal in Boston. And by the way, I give a talk every year at MIT, and I go into a lot of these things for urban planning students, master's students in urban planning at MIT. And there was $11 million for slum removal, and they tried at first. The first major urban renewal project, eminent domain project, was in New York streets, which today where the Herald is. If people know where the Boston Herald is today, that was, and the reason they called it New York streets because they were all named after different cities in New York. Now, when they tore that down, nobody wanted to build there. The only one that would build there was the Traveler, the Herald Traveler, which at that time was an old-line Yankee paper. They built there, but they were the only ones that were willing to build in the South End. So then they went around looking for a slum in a good location, and they found one down the foot of Beacon Hill on the River Charles, and so they decided to take the West End. They came in with the bulldozers immediately after they got the okay from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that they could take, before the West End, you couldn't take private property for private uses. It had to be for a public use. When they took the West End was the first project in this state anyway that was taken for, private property was taken for private usages. And basically to put up luxury high-rises,
I was
And
going to say, I mean, that's prime real estate right now.
oh yeah, it was prime real estate.
That area, yeah.
And they made a lot of money off it. Plus they got the land with all kinds of write-downs. They got grants, you know, to all the soft costs they got. So they made a ton of money just putting the project together. And that's basically what happened to the West End.
And what happened to the common, the neighborhood,
Oh,
and the neighbors? What happened?
Everybody got. They claimed that you would be able to come back to the West End, and once they built the new projects or houses or whatever you want to call it, when the new project went up, I don't mean a project in like a housing project, but once the property went up, that you would have the right to return. What they didn't tell you was that they changed the plan around 1957, and that there would be all luxury apartments, and if you couldn't afford, at that time, in 1958 to 60, most people in Boston were paying like between $25 and $60 for rent, and they were charging $300 a month for rent. So there was no way that West Enders could come back. It was just we were frozen out because of the high prices. Of course, they never told anybody that they had changed the mission of the project, and instead of being a mixed-use project like that they originally planned, they had changed it to a luxury, a high-rise project, and it sort of shut us all out. Of course, everybody sort of like said, "Oh, well, it was a slum anyway," and it doesn't matter, you know. But we remembered.
Well, a home is a home, and you seem like you had some great memories there, and I think that the people of the West End are very fortunate to have someone like you who is really taken it. Yeah, really, you're really focused on keeping this vivid memory in people's minds, and also giving families, like you have children, and giving just something to talk about their culture and about their homeland when they were growing up, and it's really a credit to you.
Well, the problem is you can't go back, and like like a lot of people get displaced from the North End or different places, at least they can go back and the buildings are still there, and they can show what it is. The only thing I have to show is that I show old pictures on on cable access of what the West End used to be like. Otherwise, and a lot of those probably would have ended up in somebody's garbage pail,
right?
Because these videos and everything. A lot of people, you know, their kids, they're treasures, but when their kids get them, they take them and they dump them. So, you know, maybe we wouldn't even have those if we hadn't started 15 years ago.
Right. And tell me about this Lost Neighborhood program.
Oh, Lost Neighborhood was a show. It was an ABC documentary done on the West End. And basically what's good about it is because when you talk about the West End, the first thing everybody tells you is that, oh, you must be talking, it's nostalgia, you know, yeah, every place was like that. But this was done in 1962. It was done by ABC. And when the people there are saying the same things I'm saying now, so it gives me a little bit of legitimacy. You know, I can say, well, that's the way it was then, that's the way we felt then, that's the way we felt now.
Right.
And every objective study that was done in the West End proves that, you know, what I'm saying. As a matter of fact, there was a study, a psychological study done by Mark Freed, and in it he discovered, they did a survey, and when they got to the questions, were you happy, sad, other, a lot of people were putting other. And what he found is that people were grieving for their homes, even whether they owned them or not. I mean, you know, just because you didn't own property didn't mean that you couldn't grieve for it.
Right.
And he said that was the first time that we came across that people could grieve for inanimate objects. You know, before that it was like death and, you know, whatever else. But that was the first time, you know, we realized that people could actually grieve, you know, for losing their home or moving out. And he said the really strange thing about the West End was whether West Enders owned the property or not, they figured the West End belonged to them. It was like sort of we were communistic in the sense that the West End is ours. You know what I mean? And we should have it. But we got forced out, and that was the end of it. It's probably the most, it's the worst example of how not to conduct urban renewal. You know, it's been used by the BRA, everybody.
Really?
Of course, they keep saying it was a tragedy and that it could never happen today. But when we went into a project now, they put up West End Place. We were partners down there and everything, and they said that it couldn't happen nowadays. It happened again. They just don't care. The power structure. If you don't have leverage, then or now, if you don't have the leverage, you get shut out. I mean, it's unfortunate. But you get shut out.
as we know, you've been working hard to make sure people don't forget about the West End, but there are also, throughout the years, have been different programs that have gone on. And one of them is at St. Joseph's Church. Recently had a program there. They had a mass, and I know that local access fans will also see it on the West End video newsletter. They'll see a more in-depth look at the mass that went on at St. Joseph's Mass. But tell me a little bit about this program.
Well, every year, starting right after I started the newsletter, Father Buck, who was at St. Joseph's for about 30 years, because the church really didn't, after they tore the West End down, it really didn't have a lot of parishioners anymore. So he was more or less a caretaker for this church. And every year, he decided to have a mass for all the deceased West Enders, not just, former West Enders, but, anybody that lived there. And so starting around 84 or 85, he started having this mass for deceased West Enders. And once a year, we'd all come back and go to the church. And it's interesting because you meet all the people and that you knew all these years. And then they have like a light lunch afterwards, and you go down there and you schmooze with your friends, and you talk with each other, and it's a good time. Plus, it's St. Joseph's was a large part of our lives in the West End. So when you go back, and like when I was looking there, I was talking to my son. My son was in the church with me, and they cut the altar rail shut on each side because nowadays everything is open. And when I was growing up, you had altar rails. I don't know if you're probably not that old.
I don't remember them. But
they used to have altar rails that went right across. It sort of like shut out them from us. Well, now they took it all out, but I could see that they in St. Joseph's they cut it off. Well, 10 feet here, 10 feet there, and I was looking at it. I said, "Yeah, I remember that." And, you'd go up and your first communion. In my mind was, you sort of like a priest. Going back to, I'm thinking about kneeling in front of that altar rail and receiving first communion, and then confirmation. Same thing. You'd go up to the rail and the priest would slap you in the face, or
Well, it seems like you had some good memories from St. Joseph's also. Has there been any other type of West End reunions?
We haven't had them in the recent years. There haven't been that many. I keep thinking that I'm going to put one together, at least a sit-down dinner or something. And then what happens is I'm doing so many things that
well, you're so busy. You think
I forget about it.
You need to get someone else to plan your events between the show and the newsletter, and probably so many contacts that people that call and want to talk to you about all these projects that you're doing.
Right. And we have I guess I have email, and I get emails, and I get the phone calls. And, a lot of people call up, and they're mad because they can't get into the apartments down in the West End Place. They feel shut out, and they feel like that they've been, messed over again. And they have, actually. It wasn't a good project. I mean, we went down there at the groundbreaking. We were heroes. We were out there, and they fed us, and they made a big deal of us, and everybody's saying, "Oh, we're coming back." When they put the project together, we were outside, and the cardinal was saying inside that this puts the West End, the story of the West End, to rest, and yet we're outside picketing them.
I was going to say, you've done some picketing too.
Yeah, so it didn't put anything to rest. All it did was start a new chapter of government interference and government malfeasance, and especially when they were tied in with like the archdiocese. How can you fight the church? I mean, that's. I mean, I'm not against like St. Joseph's and everything is local, but when you start getting into the archdiocese on a higher level, okay, they're a different thing than your parish church. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm trying to put the Catholic Church into a bind. I'm a Catholic. I go to church every Sunday. I donate my money, but I'm not crazy about the archdiocese. Okay, and I don't know if that's good or bad or indifferent, but that's the way I feel.
Well, tell me about the museum, the West End Museum.
Well, we were supposed to have a West End Museum, and that was part of the package the BRA put together. They were supposed to give us office spaces for the Old West End Housing Corporation. They were supposed to finance the Old West End Housing Corporation. They were supposed to give office spaces for the West Ender newsletter. They were supposed to give a museum, and we've been waiting for it. And it's been they held back on the space, and they said because we filed suit so that we could get preference in the building. They said that the federal laws conflict with the state laws. That we have state laws on our side that say that any West Ender evicted from the West End should have preference, but they have federal laws that say that they can't do that anymore. So we went to court to clarify that, and we sued the city and whatever, even our partners, because that's what the lawyer said we had to do. And they said because we sued them, they didn't have to give us anything, and they just walked away from the whole bunch of us, cut our funding, said we're not going to give you office spaces, we're not giving you the museum. So now we're in talks with them, and but they don't. They said they want to name half the board. They don't think we can financially carry the museum. They come up with all these excuses why they don't want to put us in there anymore. But it's a long haul, and I've been fighting this fight for too long, I think. I would think somewhere that these people would have a little bit of compassion in their souls and look at it. And, you know, there should be justice for West Enders. I mean, they didn't do anything for us in 1958. They really haven't done anything for us in the 90s, but yet they keep saying that it's all washed up because they did everything they had to do. But they really didn't.
Hopefully the 2000s will be a different story for the West Enders. Tell me, what's your favorite memory growing up?
Oh, there were a whole host of them.
Well, from that
Swimming
area.
in the Charles River.
Okay.
Course,
a lot of people can't say they did that either.
Of course, they closed it down when I was, they closed it, they said the Charles River was polluted when I think I was 9 years old. So after up until about then, it was funny because sometimes you drive by the Longfellow Bridge, and they used to have these poles. They were red and white, and they said danger on it, and they had ropes around them. You couldn't go out swimming beyond that, and they had right beside on the right hand side of the Longfellow Bridge, they had sand. There was a little beach down there, and we used to go down, and you could stand around and swim and everything. That was nice. The river in the summer, sitting on the, like 9 o'clock at night when it was just getting dark, and you're sitting on the river, it was beautiful. Playing sports. The West End was like any other working class neighborhood, South Boston, North End. You had teams, you played softball. It was a vibrant neighborhood, and you'd go into any shop, and each shop was like a meeting place because you'd go in to buy, let's say, pork chops, and you'd run into 5 neighborhoods, and you'd spend half an hour talking to them, or you'd go into the bakery, and you'd spend time, in the bakery with whoever was there. And the greatest thing about the West End was the people, okay? And in most of the neighborhoods in the West End, in Boston, when you moved into a neighborhood, you had to be there a long time before you were considered whatever, okay? In the West End, it was strange because when you moved in there, you were automatically accepted, unless you broke a West End taboo. Like, 2 of the biggest I could say was like squealing on somebody or running away from a fight. Those were probably the 2 biggest that I can think of, on my level as a teenager. But those are probably the only things that would get people really mad at you and shun you. But basically, the West End was, everybody just came together, and the strange part was, and maybe that's why it happened, was because everybody was of different nationalities and different religions, so you more or less melded together. In a sense, it was a true melting pot. But when they had a true melting pot, they took it and wiped it out.
But I know that you still keep in touch with all of your childhood friends, but now you've made a host
of
new
we were at the camp.
Yeah.
We were at the camp. We rented the camp, and I had 125 people there. And somebody went around and took a list of the 125 people that were there. And when I went home, I took the list, and I said, gee, what am I going to do with this? I didn't know if I was going to throw it out. And I said, well, what I'll do in case we do it again next year, I'll just put out a 1-page flyer. It was one side of 1 page, and I sent it out. Next thing I know, I had 250 people on the list.
Wow.
That was a page and a half, a Xerox page, front and back.
Yeah.
Next thing I know, I had 500, then it was like 2,000. At one time, we had like 4,200 people. And we go out, it's not a matter of fact, I should have took one tonight. It's actually a newspaper now rather than a newsletter.
It's a newspaper now. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, pictures and, the whole, we still call it a newsletter because that was, that's the way it started.
Right,
Yeah,
people remember it.
The West End newsletter, right? But it's, we put it together, we put pictures in there, the old times. People write in and put their stories in about what happened, and sometimes very poignant stories, sometimes funny stories, So it's interesting, and it gives everybody. I think Peter Galzinis said it best. We had Peter Galzinis on the show once, and he said, "You guys are the neighborhood of the mind." You know? So that's
good.
That's what we basically do, is we keep the neighborhood together. Matter of fact, we went to a meeting once that the planning officer of urban affairs, which is the Archdiocese housing group, and what they wanted to get some money from a group called LISC, you know, which gives soft cost money to build buildings. When we went in there, the executive director of LISC, he really didn't want to give them any money. So they called us in, and we went to this meeting with them. And they said, Charles River Park's there. They're a neighborhood now. Yeah, you were a neighborhood, but it's gone. So I told them, I said, you know, buildings don't make neighborhoods. I said, people make neighborhoods.
Right.
I said, we're more of a neighborhood now, and we don't have any buildings than Charles River Park would ever be. Right? He looked at me and he said, you're right. And they gave the planning office $50,000 soft grant. I mean,
that's great.
It was a repayable loan, but it still gave them soft cost money.
Jim, we're just about out of time.
Okay.
I want to thank you for being on Middlesex Update. I know it was a little we turned the tables today and you were interviewed, and you did a great job, and we'd love to have you back on the show again.
Anytime.
You know, I only have about a minute left. Is there anything special coming up for the West Enders in the year 2000 or 2001?
Not exactly at this point, unless the museum. We're in negotiations with the museum. If the museum does end up going through, you'll hear about it, because it'll get promoted, and everything will work out. But at this point, it may or may not go. So,
well, best of luck, and we'd love to have you back on Middlesex Update.
Anytime. Call me, I'll come.
And you do a great show on for the video newsletter. I know that you put countless hours into that, and really just into this whole cause. That wraps it up for us here at Middlesex Update. I'm your host, Melissa Hurley. Thank you again for watching, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.